Good morning, everybody. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It is an exciting conference here, and this morning was already very interesting. And I learned that our friend from Russia, he did the same program in the United States as me at Johns Hopkins University. And our dear friend of the European Union, he started to explain to us that he did the Erasmus program. At this time, it wasn't working very well, and I can assure you, still nowadays, it does not work very well. But it exists, and it makes it able for the students, to meet each other. And that's the most important aspect, to bring people together, to bring young people together. And therefore, we decided in my university to start a European program supported by the European Union. It deals with it's a master program, and it deals with humanitarian assistance. That means we bring together international students, and they study how to organize humanitarian assistance in cases of disasters or in cases of armed conflicts. And it's a pity, we have a lot of disasters and we have a lot of armed conflicts. Therefore, this program is very important for the European Union, because the European Union is the biggest donor of humanitarian assistance. And we have a second master program in the field of human rights and democratization. And we bring together international students the first semester in Venice and the second semester in one of the participating universities, among them my university. The idea is to bring people together, young people, because they have the responsibility for the future. And therefore, that's the main task of a university, to bring young people together and to enable young people to solve problems. And we have a lot of problems. One of the problems we have in this region here, and I like very much the title of your conference, cooperation. And being a lawyer, okay, if I talk about cooperation, my starting point is what is the applicable law? And it's international law. And international law, I know the reputation is not that good. It's a pity our former American ambassador isn't here, because politics sometimes tend to apply international law in a way which is a little bit influenced by national interests. And that's a pity, especially if big powers do not act in accordance with international obligation. That's very dangerous. Okay, international law is the starting point for our considerations. And if you apply international law, you are going to establish a kind of security. And we have heard this morning, insecurity is now one of the biggest threats concerning international stability. And therefore, if one looks into the regulations in the field of international law, then we can realize, yes, we are confronted in the Balkans too, but we are also confronted in the South Caucasus with threats to international peace. And one of the threats is the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. It's a threat because it's a so-called frozen conflict, but nobody can make sure that such a frozen conflict does not explode. And therefore, it's a danger, it's a threat to international peace. And we have mechanisms to deal with such situations. The mechanism is to be found in the Charter of the United Nations. And we have a whole chapter on the settlement of disputes. And I would argue, yes, it's an obligation to settle disputes. And unsettled disputes create a threat. However, the UN is a political body. It's not a legal body. And therefore, the UN decided, okay, let's transfer that problem to the OSCE, to the Minsk process. Yes, that's possible, also in legal terms. However, in legal terms, we have also the rule of law principle. The rule of law means, yes, you have to come to a decision. You have to come to a decision in a time frame which is reasonable. And therefore, it seems to me, yes, the Minsk process has to create some results. Otherwise, we are still confronted with such a frozen conflict. And the Minsk process, they decided to find a solution on the basis of three principles. The ambassador mentioned it. It's a principle of territorial integrity, self-determination, and the prohibition of the use of force. So far, so good. And then we were talking about the relationship between territorial integrity and self-determination, and then we realized both principles have the same value, the same legal value. However, in state practice, there's a strong tendency to apply only the principle of territorial integrity. One can regret that or not. However, we have no state practice that indeed peoples were entitled to exercise their right to self-determination besides the process of decolonization. All the other cases which are not part of the decolonization process, all the other cases have their legal foundation not in the principle of self-determination, but in the agreement of the concerned state. Therefore, we have some establishment of new statehood like South Sudan, but at the end, it was a decision of the government of Sudan to accept a referendum in South Sudan. Okay, that means we have two principles, and the two principles have the same value. However, in the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, I do have a lot of doubts that we indeed can apply the principle of self-determination, because I wonder who is the holder of that right. And I used to work for 3 years with the High Commissioner on National Minorities, the OSCE High Commissioner located in The Hague. And at this time, it was quite clear. We were talking about so-called national minorities. And the national minority has a kin state. Like the Russians in Estonia, they have a kin state, that's Moscow, that's Russia. But they never consider themselves being a legal entity, being entitled to self-determination, because they are not a people. They are part of the Russian people, and they live in another country, and therefore they enjoy rights of a national minority in Estonia. And it seems to me the situation is very similar. Can you consider the inhabitants of Nagorno-Karabakh being an own people, having an own right to self-determination? No, they are part of the people of Armenia, and therefore they are entitled to enjoy minority rights, but they are not entitled to enjoy self-determination. Minority rights means they have a right to keep their own identity, and they have the right to be respected as a minority. They have a right to be respected concerning their human rights, but they do not have a right to self-determination. Okay, what happens? Now we are confronted with a political problem, and it seems to me the politics is not ready to act. And the consequence is that we lawyers get a new problem, because now we have to deal with the human rights claims of those people who lost their homes, who lost their family life. And of course, I mean, Armenia and Azerbaijan are member states to the European Convention on Human Rights. And that means we have got a first decision of the Human Rights Court of Europe dealing with Shiragov versus Armenia. And as a result, Armenia was obliged or is obliged to pay compensation to the persons who lost their home. Okay, it's a solution in accordance with human rights law. That's wonderful. However, it seems to me we are going to create more and more problems in the legal field. The European Court is overcrowded with a caseload because politics is not going to act. And therefore, part of the cooperation in that part of the world here, part of the cooperation is, hey, politics has a responsibility to find solutions on the basis of cooperation. And that's the idea of my presentation. Thank you.